Kada sam 28.6.1993. godine u velikoj akciji oslobađanja Ljubine, značajne kote iznad Konjica, u želji da se rastereti konjičko ratište, došao u situaciju da praga koja je trebala da bude zaustavljena od jedinice druge brigade koja je trebala da spriječi pristup toj prazi i to nije učinila, bio, možemo da kažemo, teže ranjen kao i 14 mojih saboraca, a u toj bitci je 3 mojih boraca postiglo šehadet. Ja sam nakon tog ranjavanja, koje u stvari u prvom momentu nisam apsolutno osjetio, niti sam osjetio bilo kakvu bol. A onda sam nakon toga, umjesto te prelijepe konjičke doline, imao pred sobom džennetska prostranstva. Allah mi je dao da u tom trenutku nisam gubio apsolutno svijest, ali moje ruke su zamijenjene krilima. I onda sam letio tim džennetskim prostranstvima. Isto kao da sada vidim vrhove svojih krila kako se prelamaju i kako letim visoko i kako se spuštam i kako imam pravo da biram najljepši dvorac ili da izaberem neki od dvoraca, a to su sve bili dvorci od dragulja, odnosno svjetlosti. Ali nakon tog moga leta, nakon tog moga spuštanja na jedno mjesto, onda sam na jednom osjetio bol u glavi i leđima. Bio sam onda potpuno siguran da u stvari nisam postigao šehadet. Jer taj moj bol je pokazao da sam ja na dunjaluku, da nisam na ahiretu. Da nisam u džennetu, već da sam na ljubini. I tek onda sam zaplakao. I sad kada razmišljam o tom trenutku, i sad mi to teško pada. Nakon toga sam bio tužan prilikom izvlačenja mojih saboraca, posebno moga Aziza Čajića koji je u toj akciji bio teško ranjen. Nakon nošenja 3 šehida bio sam izuzetno tužan. Zbog toga što nisam dobio ono što sam vidio, odnosno ono gdje sam mogao da biram taj jedan od tih mnogobrojnih dvoraca u toj dolini, prelijepih rijeka, koje ni na dunjaluku nisam mogao apsolutno da zamislim. Bilo mi je teško i razmišljao sam kako se sada ponovo vratiti u borbu. Kako nastaviti borbu, odnosno kako svaki put nakon svake bitke sa nekim od šehida zagrliti, poljubiti novog šehida ili druge šehide i onda smoći snage i doći majci i babi i kazati da je njihov sin, maloljetni golobradi sin od 18-20 godina, postigao šehadet. I naravno, uvijek se moglo naići na neko iznenađenje, možda nekada i na teške riječi od roditelja. Ali pred svaku bitku sam govorio svojim borcima da se dobro čuvaju. Trudio sam se da dobro isplaniram svaku akciju i da u tim akcijama imamo što manji broj šehida, jer je naša domovina Bosna i Hercegovina trebala što više boraca, a za šehadet je bilo sasvim dovoljno vremena.
They called a code and they come running in. I was above my body. I could see them doing chest compressions. I could see them, all the nurses around. I could smell the most beautiful flowers I've ever smelled. And then I heard music. When I opened my eyes, I knew where I was. I knew I was in heaven.
In 2019, Charlotte Holmes was having a routine checkup with her cardiologist when her blood pressure spiked to 234 over 134.
My heart doctor said, "You're not going home. We're going to put you in the hospital. We've got to get that blood pressure down. It's got to come down. You're having another stroke, or you're going to have a heart attack." They put me in a room and started an IV just to, try to get that blood pressure down.
Charlotte's husband, Danny, stayed with her while the hospital staff tended to her.
Immediately, they call this code, and everybody started rushing in. They just started working on her. And my feelings was, I thought, boy, I'm wondering if I'm even going to be able to bring her home.
Charlotte began describing things to Danny.
She started talking about the flowers. Well, I looked around and I knew there was no flowers in that room. That's when I knew she was not in this world when that was going on.
Charlotte's heart stopped. For the next 11 minutes, she was clinically dead.
I was above my body. I could see Danny standing in the corner. He had backed up. I could see them, all the nurses around. Then I opened my eyes. I looked around at the beauty. I could see the trees. I could see the grass. And everything was swaying with the music, because everything in heaven worships God. I can't convey to you what heaven looked like, because it's so above what we could even imagine, a million times.
Charlotte says she was led into heaven by angels.
There's no fear. It's like pure joy. When the angels takes over, there's no fear. When you're going home, it's pure joy.
She says she then began to recognize deceased family members.
I seen my mom. I seen my dad. I seen my sister. I seen family members standing behind. I seen saints of old. See, they didn't look old. They didn't look sick. None of them wore glasses. They looked like they were in their 30s. But yet it says in the scriptures, we will be known as we were known. I knew them there, in their new bodies. They looked wonderful.
What Charlotte saw after that, however, shocked her.
Standing behind my mom and dad was a light so bright. I couldn't look upon it. I mean, it was so bright. But I knew it was my Heavenly Father. Seen a toddler. And that toddler, I couldn't understand. And I can remember thinking, who is this? And I heard my Father say to me, my Heavenly Father say to me, it's your child. I lost that child. I was 5.5 months pregnant. I can remember them holding the baby up and saying, Charlotte, it's a boy. Then he was gone. So when I seen this toddler, I said, God, how is that possible? He says, they continue to grow in heaven, but there's no time. It's eternity. So 48 years, and here my child, our child, is a toddler.
Then God chose to show her one more thing.
God took me to the edge of hell, and I looked down, and the smell, and then rotten flesh. That's what it smelled like, and screams. After seeing the beauty of heaven, the contrast to seeing hell is almost unbearable. And he says, I show you this to tell you, if some of them do not change their ways, this is where they shall reside. I heard my Father say, you have time to go back and share.
As quickly as she had gone to heaven, Charlotte's spirit came back.
I felt myself being drawn into my body. I felt the pain where I hadn't felt pain. I felt the sorrow. Danny said that they come running in and your eye blinked. And he said, I knew then I was going to get to bring you home.
Charlotte made a full recovery and was released from the hospital after 2 weeks. She has been sharing her story since then, in public appearances and with everyone she comes in contact with.
People need hope. They want to know that there really is something out there. They want to know that everything's okay.
Hello, and welcome to Beyond Belief. Today, we're going to be talking about near-death experiences. Are they just the hallucinations of a dying brain? Or are they evidence that our consciousness can actually survive the death of our bodies? That question and more coming up next on Beyond Belief. Hi, Dr. Long, and welcome to the show. It's a pleasure to have you here.
I really appreciate the opportunity to be on your show. Thank you.
It's my pleasure. And I just wanted to open up by mentioning that, this is obviously a serious topic. I mean, you seem like a very upbeat and fun kind of person, it's interesting you explore these very serious and heavy topics. And so I'll start off with something, a little bit heavy, which is 4 years ago, I lost my father, unfortunately. And I ended up, finding your website and reading an enormous amount about near-death experiences. And I have to say that I found the accounts so compelling and in a certain way, very comforting. And I really appreciate the fact that you've made it available for so many people, and it's so active and constantly updated. I really recommend that people check it out. But I wanted to ask you, you're a radiation oncologist by profession. That's correct?
That's correct.
So I assume that you have experienced multiple times watching people not make it on the operating table. And I assume also that people have shared their accounts with you firsthand. And I'm wondering if that's what generated your initial interest in this topic. And if there's any particular account that you first experienced that registered with you as significant.
Sure. Yeah, Adam, great question. First of all, I'm sorry to hear about your father, but as you surmise, many, many years ago, decades ago, I was going through one of the leading medical journals in the world, Journal of the American Medical Association. Quite by accident, in the title was the phrase near-death experience. And I was puzzled. Nothing in my medical training had taught me anything about what that might mean. I mean, you're either dead or you're not. And so, goodness, how could anyone not be interested in life after death or anything related to that? So, puzzled and intrigued, I read the whole article and was immediately fascinated. Here was a physician, a cardiologist, describing patients who'd had cardiac arrest, their heart stopped, and yet at that time described very accurate observations of ongoing earthly events, even while they were comatose and being resuscitated. Everything I knew medically said that's impossible. So I read some of the references, was intrigued. It was several years later. I had a college friend visiting me, and over supper, the wife of my college friend shared an absolutely dramatic first-person near-death experience. She was under general anesthesia and coded. Her heart stopped because she had a lot of medical allergies. Her consciousness rose above her body. She saw her frantic resuscitation efforts and described it in a way I knew medically is real. It's not like Hollywood. Crash carts don't magically appear. There's a lot of panic and chaos when it's unexpected like that. She went into a tunnel, had a life review, had a stunningly detailed near-death experience. And everything I knew medically was that this could not possibly be explained by physical brain function. And so I sort of bookmarked that, but said, I've got to learn more about this. And then a couple more years after that, intrigued by that limited information I had, I set up a website, the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, with the goal to satisfy my curiosity. Are these experiences for real? Very quickly, when we received the first few of what would ultimately be over 3,500 near-death experiences, that answer came vividly from the first source of information from the near-death experiences themselves. Absolutely, they are real. And that began a voyage that's now lasted over 20 years, continuing to learn about near-death experiences and share what I've learned with the world.
So when you say it's not medically possible, just for the benefit of the listeners who may not know what that means, why couldn't it be the case that this is just the last, dying gasps of the brain firing all of its neurons and some hallucination as the brain is shutting down, as opposed to some transcendental experience that the soul of this person is having?
Mm-hmm. Well, hallucinations are by definition medically unreal, non-real memories or perceptions. With near-death experiences, as I mentioned in that example of the very first one I heard, their consciousness rose above their body. There's been a large number of studies of those observations of ongoing earthly events, while physically they're unconscious or clinically dead with an absent heartbeat. It's been studied in my research and others that what they observe while their physical body is unconscious is overwhelmingly accurate, even down to the fine details. In fact, if that observations of consciousness leave the area of their physical body, if they're making observations in that what we call out-of-body experience phenomena, part of the near-death experience, even if these observations of ongoing earthly events are far from their geographically far from their physical body and way beyond any possible physical sensory awareness, still the observations, what they see and hear, when they go back to check them out later, are almost invariably over 95% accurate in my experience. And of course, let's not forget, with the very first near-death experience I saw, she was under general anesthesia. Under that blanket of sleep, it should be absolutely impossible, Adam, for there to be any conscious awareness. And then her heart stopped because of an allergic reaction. Well, Adam, 10 to 20 seconds after your heart stops, the EEG, measure of brain electrical activity, goes absolutely flat. It should be absolutely impossible to have any conscious experience. And yet, both under general anesthesia and having the heart stopped, it should be doubly impossible to have any experience or memory at all. And yet, by the scores, people have reported near-death experiences under exactly those circumstances, just like the first near-death experience I ever heard.
So would you say that this is, I mean, you're a scientist, and you are presenting this from a scientific perspective. Is this scientifically provable? Or is this more like testimony that you might hear in a court of law? Obviously, no one, there were maybe a handful of witnesses to the crime. We're trying to forensically piece together what might have happened, something in the past, but there is no direct knowledge of actually what happened. So how would you respond to that question?
Adam, that's a great question. In order for near-death experiences to be scientifically investigated, they have to be, the term is falsifiable. In other words, what is shared in the near-death experience has to prove that it's false, that it's not due to some occurrence of memory of perceptions apart from the physical brain. And you can easily falsify those by, as we described, those out-of-body observations. If they were false or unreal at a substantial percentage of the time, then that would falsify those observations. It would falsify near-death experiences in general. But that's not what's happening. You can falsify them by having people, and we have an example of that, who's born totally blind, who had a highly visual near-death experience. Now, if you had somebody born totally blind for whom vision is unknown and unknowable, and they have a near-death experience, well, it would be falsifiable if none of these people, under such circumstances, report vision. And yet that's not what we're observing. We actually have a series of people, either legally blind or severely impaired vision, that have crystal clear vision described during their near-death experience, even if it's outside of their whole prior life experience. So these are just a couple examples of how you can falsify near-death experiences. You can look for what occurs during it and say, well, that's false, that's consistent with a hallucinatory, unreal experience. And we're not finding that at all.
Okay, so when I hear that and read about it and interact with this information, that's my reaction is to feel, compelled by it. It seems very hard to explain at very least, but if this is the case, why is it not appearing in scientific peer-reviewed journals, and why isn't it this month's feature in Nature? And shouldn't this be a very big deal? I mean, shouldn't people be wanting to research this more and more? I mean, it seems like it would be one of the most exciting discoveries of all time from a scientific perspective. I don't get the sense that that's happening just yet. Is that fair to say?
Oh, absolutely. And that's a good point. Now, first of all, near-death experience is actually mainstream in the scientific and medical literature. There's been well over 200 publications in peer-reviewed medical and scientific literature, including some of the leading medical and scientific journals in the world. So it's there. It's just, and I agree with you, not nearly there as much as it should be. I think there's several barriers that keep people from investigating near-death experiences in a scholarly scientific manner. First of all, it's hard to access near-death experiencers. They're not apt to go find a researcher and say, hey, I'm ready to share my experience. So you really need to find large numbers of people that had a near-death experience, and that's a little bit difficult to do. But I think even more importantly than that, anything in the so-called paranormal, even if it's not paranormal at all, like near-death experiences, Good gosh, a Gallup survey published in 1981 estimated perhaps as many as 5% of Americans had a near-death experience. So they're not rare. They happen to people of all walks of life, physicians, scientists, you name it. They're a very broad-based experience. So again, it's puzzling to me too why there isn't more research and interest in this, and something which has such dramatic implications for consciousness, for life after death, and literally meaning and purpose on earth, what's really important that we hear over and over in near-death experiences. So again, I think it's just that scientific taboo that keeps it from being studied more. And of course, one thing that drives scientific discoveries, unfortunately, is money. And it's very difficult, close to impossible actually, to get a grant or federal funding, if you will, to study something like near-death experiences because of that taboo about its association with paranormal, again, which it's really not. These are normal experiences.